You may have noticed that he forgot to read that card, and that's significant. He's losing his hair, he's getting old, and thus he's forgetting things, so y'all pray for him. I'll be looking for some other ways to get him back. So, go, if you will, to Matthew chapter 8. Matthew chapter 8, and you might even mark the book of Mark chapter 4 will be there as well, off and on. I want to express, I don't want to spend long on this because I am bound to forget someone, so I try not to mention names, and I won't, but I do want to express the sentiments that Rocky shared about our Vacation Bible School. Those working behind the scenes, you know who you are. The success of yesterday was because of you, and so we are so thankful for you, Mike and Callie, obviously the coordinators of it. And I know Brooklyn's not looking for any notoriety, but she spent all day here Friday putting all of this together, and we are so thankful for her and the time that she spent, and of course all of the others. And I said I wouldn't mention names, and there I go mentioning names. I'm just so grateful for those who willingly serve behind the scenes, making this local congregation what it is. So thank you, guys. Thank you very much. I am thankful and honored, and I feel privileged to be just a small part of this congregation. There are people who walk into our assemblies on a weekly basis carrying storms. We would call these storms of life. Storms that oftentimes nobody but them can see. Some, for example, are fighting anxiety. Anxiety that is so intense and strong that such kept them up Saturday night before coming to the assembly. Some are grieving losses that still ache years later. Some are burdened by family struggles, financial pressures, failing health, or just the consequences associated with past sins. Sins that simply have not been forgiven. Well, in the midst of these storms of life, if you are human, you wonder, why? Why has this storm or these storms come into my life? Sometimes we ask, and right now, why have they decided to enter into my life right now? In other words, there's never a right time for a storm to be welcomed. No storm is welcomed into our lives. They are all inconvenient, right? Have you ever noticed that the why question often is asked during the storms? And not only that, but the why question often becomes the deal breaker for some. And I think there's a reason for this. Because it is the question that seeks an explanation rather than a solution. What do you think about that? Because we'll build on that as the lesson progresses this morning. The why question is a question that seeks an explanation rather than a solution. Because most questions do seek a solution. For example, the question of what should I do seeks direction. The question of how do I handle this, that seeks wisdom. The question of who can help me right now seeks support. And the question of when will this end seeks hope. But why seeks an explanation. And there's a problem with this because the problem is this: the explanation often lies beyond our ability to know. But there is a positive implication behind asking the why question, and that is it causes us to confront our limitations. You know, when I ask why such has occurred to me, or why is this happening to me, or why is this happening to them, and so forth, it causes me to confront that reality that I often sometimes seek to avoid. That is, I don't have all the answers. I don't know. I may never know. And then I start, well, what if I never know? Then what do? You see, just keep going on and on. I want you to imagine, if you will, a child. Parents, you can relate to this especially. I want you to imagine a young child, perhaps a toddler. You think of innocency, you think of toddlers especially. I want you to imagine a child, a toddler, undergoing a painful medical procedure. Perhaps you as a parent remember your child when they were younger undergoing a medical procedure. And the child during the procedure asks you this question right here, one similar to it. Mom, Dad, why are you letting this happen? Wow, that's a tough question. Because you are their everything. They look up to you. You're their caregiver. They know they come to you for everything. You're going to provide. And they ask, why are you letting this happen? And as a parent, you know what you could do? You could attempt to explain anatomy. You could attempt to explain disease, treatment plans, and long-term health outcomes. But much of that explanation would be beyond the child's understanding, right? They're not going to understand the terminology that you are using. They might hear the word, but nothing that makes sense enters. What the child needs then most at that moment is not complete explanation, but confidence in the parent's love and wisdom. Would you agree? That's what they need most. That little toddler doesn't need all of that explanation. And you know, we could, in the same as with God, God often gives us a reason to trust rather than an explanation to satisfy. He does. Moreover, explanations do not always remove pain. I want you to suppose someone learns exactly why they lost a job. Or they learn exactly why a relationship ended. Or exactly why a disease developed. Let me ask you this. Will the explanation, no matter if it is the perfect one, heal the hurt? I mean, will the explanation heal the pain that they are currently experiencing? No. It may answer the question, but it does not necessarily, and most of the time, it does not heal the wound. Thus, knowledge alone rarely provides comfort. Now, why do I say all this? I am convinced that what people ultimately need is not merely information, but they need assurance, they need strength, and they need hope. And only Jesus can provide those things. That's lasting. That's never ending. And that only a conscientious Christian will consider as it gets better. Well, this brings us to the storm on the Sea of Galilee. Yes, we read about this particular miraculous occurrence in 3 of the gospel accounts, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Matthew chapter 8, verses 23 through 27. Mark chapter 4, 35 through 41, and Luke chapter 8, 22 through 25, with Mark's account being the most lengthy. What we're going to do this morning is we're just going to bring out a few points. Okay, we're just not going to be able to cover everything. And the points that we're going to draw and the conclusions that we make will come almost exclusively from Matthew and Mark's account, okay? Now, let's summarize some things here. If you were with us at VBS yesterday, then you know these things, or if you're just a Bible student and you've studied this account, you know. But with this account of Jesus calming the storms, this storm, the disciples no doubt, wanted relief from the crisis. They wanted relief. They wanted the storm to stop. But here's the thing. Beneath that was a deeper question. And here it is. The deeper question was, why are we in this storm if we're following Jesus? I mean, Jesus is right there. Why would I be in this situation? I want you to notice what Jesus did not do, that they thought he should have done. He did not explain why the storm developed. He did not stop the intensity of the storm. And he did not explain why he was asleep. But notice what he did do. Among other things, the most important thing that he did is he demonstrated his power over the storm. The disciples received no explanation for the storm itself, but they received something, from my perspective, greater. A clearer understanding of Christ. A clearer understanding of Christ. Notice they entered the storm focused on the waves. They left the storm focused on Jesus. Because at the end of the storm, each account says, the disciples asking the question, who could this be? See, they focused on the waves, they're focused on the storm, they're focused on the difficulties and the anxiety associated with those things. All of that, at the end, when Jesus stopped the storm, turned into them understanding better his true identity. The greatest comfort in the storm then is not the absence of waves. Perhaps it was the presence of Jesus. Perhaps it was the presence of Jesus. So what I want to do then is I want to draw some observations from these two accounts regarding two things. Number one, how faith responds to trouble, because that's when faith is really exposed. Okay? How you respond to trouble exposes the depth of your faith. And secondly, why disciples must trust Jesus, underline this word, completely. Christianity is a religion of trusting someone else for the outcome. Trusting someone else to handle our future. Trusting someone else to help us during difficult circumstances. That's what Christianity is all about. And we don't live in a world like that. We live in a world where it's very self-centered and selfish. Trust yourself. Trust the things that you can perceive with your five senses. But trusting someone who you cannot currently see with your physical eye, that's not a popular trend. But we learn that trusting Jesus completely is necessary from this account. Let's go to Matthew's account, Matthew chapter 8, 23 through 27. And really, I'm going to tell you what we're going to do is we're only going to spend time in the first two verses, 23 and 24. I'm going to draw my point from this, and then Mark's account will look at some other things. All right, Matthew's account, we'll read verse 23 and 24 together. Matthew 8. Now when he, Jesus, got into a boat, watch this, his disciples followed him, and suddenly, just underline that, disciples followed him, and suddenly. You know what I think? One of the most important observations in this text is that the disciples encountered this storm because they followed Jesus, not because they disobeyed him. I want you to follow me. Often people assume that if they are serving God faithfully, life should become easier. So when trials come, they begin to wonder, what did I do wrong? Where did I mess up? And then they might even wonder, if Jesus is with me, why am I struggling? Well, Matthew's account challenges this line of thinking. Three takeaways from this. Number one, storms come in the path of obedience. They followed him, and suddenly. I don't know what their expectations were. I don't know. They followed him. Perhaps they thought, we're good to go. The Son of God, the Messiah, God in the flesh, the one who has the world in his hands. We're following him. Everything's going to get easier. Everything's okay. But suddenly, the storm. You know, the Bible consistently traces this theme. I want you to think about it. Noah, Joseph, Daniel, Jesus. Just think about all those for a moment. Noah obeyed God, only to face ridicule. Joseph obeyed God, only to be sold into slavery. Daniel obeyed God, prepared himself to obey God, only to be thrown into a den of lions. And then Jesus, completely, fully, and in every way obeys God, only to be crucified. Faithfulness, friends, does not remove hardship. You show me the Bible verse that says Christianity is a bed of roses. In fact, let's go look at one of our Savior's remarks prior to his crucifixion. It's found in John chapter 14. John chapter 14. It might be chapter 16. Chapters 14, 15, and 16 relate the same conversation. It's a long one. Jesus having with his disciples before he died for the sins of the world. It turns out that it's the very last verse of chapter 16. John 16, verse 33. These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation. You know, where's the Christian life lived? In the world. Where is tribulation received? Jesus says in the world. But watch this. But be of good cheer, I have overcome the world. How do I overcome the world? Not only by being in Christ, but abiding in his word, right? Being faithful to him. Second takeaway from just these two verses in Matthew is the presence of Jesus is more important than the absence of storms. Most people don't like that. But the presence of Jesus is more important. I want you to notice the miracle teaches a powerful truth. The greatest blessing was not that the storm stopped. Now, we put ourselves in the disciple situation, we're probably thinking the best thing that could have happened at that moment is that the storm stopped. But the greatest blessing was not that. The greatest blessing was that Jesus was in the boat before the storm started. Right? While the disciples initially focused on the waves, Matthew's account wants us to focus on Christ. That's something that we can all take with us as we think about this account. And the third takeaway is sometimes the storm is the lesson. What if everything was handed to you on a golden platter? Like you did not have any difficulty. How would you even know the extent of your character? How would you grow in any of the graces to which we are to add to our faith? 2 Peter chapter 1. One of which is patience and perseverance. Those would not even become ever a reality unless we underwent hardship. Could we then reasonably conclude that we need storms? We don't want them, but we need them. We don't ask for them, but when they come, we are prepared for them. Jesus, did he want to be crucified? I mean, he made the remark the night before his crucifixion that if there was another way, but he knew it had to happen. So sometimes the storm is the lesson. It is significant, friends, that Jesus could have prevented the storm entirely. right? I mean, he could have stopped it before it happened, yet he allowed the disciples to experience it. Why? Well, it's because there were lessons they needed to learn that quote-unquote calm seas could never teach. All right? He knew they needed it. You know what they learned from this is they learned the weakness of their faith. They learned the greatness of Christ. And at the end, they learned the necessity of trusting Him. Many of the deepest spiritual truths are learned right smack in the middle of a storm. Now let's go to Mark's account, chapter 4. By the way, I wrote this lesson last night, so hopefully the organization of it is all right. I didn't spend a whole lot of time writing it out, so Mark chapter 4, and you go to verses 35 through 41. You know, Mark's account contains details that Matthew and Luke omit. And that's just how the synoptic writers record their writings. For example, Mark alone tells us that Jesus was asleep on a pillow in the stern, like that is in the back of the ship. I wonder, it seems to me that, and maybe you get this indication, God has a sense of humor. I mean, why write that he was asleep on a pillow? I don't know. But here's an observation. Through this detail, Mark emphasizes a struggle every disciple faces, whether this is the main point or not. And that is, can we trust Jesus when he seems silent, inactive, and unconcerned? Because that was the problem with them, with the disciples. Jesus is on the boat, there's the storm. They turn around and they see him sleeping on a pillow, and they drew the wrong conclusion that he was unconcerned. He was inactive in the situation. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew exactly what he was doing. The disciples were not merely afraid of the storm, friends. They were struggling with what Christ's apparent inactivity meant. Here's some takeaways from that. Number one, fear often causes us to question the love of Christ. It does. Fear often causes us to question the love of Christ. Look at verse 38 here. But he was in the stern, asleep on a pillow, and they awoke him and said to him, watch this, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" It's kind of ironic they call him a teacher when he's teaching them a lesson right now. They didn't realize it was a lesson. All right, he's teaching them something. And do you not care that we're perishing? Listen, this is probably one of the saddest questions in the Bible. Because especially when you consider what these men have already seen. I mean, these men had already seen miracles, healings, compassion greatly extended to others, mercy greatly extended to others, all by this same man that they're questioning now. Yet one storm, just one, caused them to question his care. Wow. I mean, fear has a way of distorting reality. You ever thought about that? Fear made them forget what they already knew. They just forgot because of fear, because of momentary fear. Temporary fear, momentary and temporary fear. Is it not the case then that fear often causes us to forget yesterday's blessings? Right? You know, I'll tell you what fear does as well. I know it does this to me, and especially when you have young children. I've seen this happen to Vanessa a number of times, and that is fear convinces us that the worst case scenario is the inevitable outcome. Right? Because we want to protect our children, so we're thinking, fear just presents to our mind the worst possible scenario. It's probably never going to happen. Statistically will not happen. But that's what fear does. So look at verse 40. But he said to them, why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith? Why are you so fearful right now? You know what Jesus wanted to do here by that single question? I can't imagine. We talk about the Bible, and I put myself in those scenarios. I'm just sitting there thinking about being on that boat, questioning everything, and immediately it hits me that Jesus had this whole thing planned to teach me a lesson. I'm scared out of my mind, only to hear Jesus say, "Brah, why are you so fearful?" Because that's just, that's just a slap in the face. Here's the conclusion. Jesus wanted to restore their perspective. That's the idea. Faith doesn't deny the storm. Faith remembers that God is still present, that God is still powerful, that God is still good, and that God is still in control. That's what faith does, right? We would be dummies to think that life's going to be a bed of roses and that faith, strong faith, means absence of hardship. That's not a reality, and Jesus doesn't even want us to entertain such a concept. He does want us to know that faith remembers that God is still there during those times. Perhaps more then than ever. In conclusion, the disciples began the journey facing the storm, but they ended it in standing in awe of Jesus. Is that how you respond to the storms of life? The storm gets you. It seems overwhelming. What do you conclude at the end of the storm when it's gone? Or perhaps even right smack in the middle of the storm, what thoughts are circulating about God? The greatest lesson of this account, friends, is not the storm, it's not the boat, it's not the sea, it's the identity of Jesus. That's what it's about. It's the one who spoke peace to the wind. It's the same Lord who speaks to troubled hearts. Now, I ask you this question, and this is a penetrating one. Wouldn't you hate to experience storms without Jesus? That's not a fun thought to entertain. We're talking about experiencing the storms that will inevitably come with Jesus right there with us, and He'll never leave us or forsake us as we walk in the light and live faithfully for Him. He's right there. They're still going to be overwhelming. They're still going to challenge us, and they're going to confront us with some difficult situations. But at least He's there, and we're in His care. That's wonderful. But I can't imagine someone willingly choose to kick Jesus out of the way and trying to get through life without Him. Well, how are they going to get through life? Is it going to be the physical, temporary things that you see? Is that going to get you through life? Because all of these things that we see will fade away and burn up, no longer be here. They're not eternal, but God is. If faith, friends, depends upon receiving every explanation, faith will eventually collapse because there are some things we just cannot answer. God never promised to explain everything, but He did promise His presence. If you need to come, why don't you do so as we stand and sing?